Hey guys, welcome to Wellness Wednesdays. Super glad you're here. We've got yet again some time we can spend together on Wednesdays and just talk about stuff that's relevant to your wellness and to your life. So super glad that we're able to do this every week, and I hope you guys are kind of getting into the rhythm and the cadence of this. I'm having a great time doing it, so if nothing else, there's that, right? So today I've got something a little different. We're shifting on you. We got the month of February coming up, and February is the love month, right? That's what we all think of. There's Valentine's Day, and that we just kind of want to take this moment and shift a little bit, start talking about relationships some more, so that we can all build our sense of connection to the relationships that matter the most, because that's ultimately what it is. You think about marriage, or if you're in a committed relationship, what else really matters, man? I mean, if you don't have that stability and you don't have a connected relationship that feels close and emotionally close and intimate, man, it just starts to feel tough. It starts to feel like a grind. And I know that a lot of you watching you're in that situation. You know, you've been in a relationship, maybe in it for years, and you have this slow drift that's happening. It's super normal, right? You throw jobs in there, a couple kids, the stress of this world that we live in, which can be crazy these days. And we turn in on ourselves, and then we just start to have this slow drift that takes place. So some of the information I'm going to give you today is just going to expose you to some content that will help you know, first of all, just like what you need to be doing in a relationship to get healthy and to stay healthy, but also how do you know when where you're at in the relationship has been bad enough, or it's tough enough, or it's strained enough to where you do need to do something differently. You need to get some help. And I think it's the biggest thing that I'm passionate about with couples is people not waiting too long. Because a lot of times what I find is if we have a marriage couple that comes in for marriage counseling, and they sit on the couch in our offices, the kind of the running dialogue that we have as therapists here at Live Well is, man, have they waited too long? It's always the question, right? Have we waited too long? And sometimes people do, right? I mean, if you come in and, man, you've been arguing for 5 years or 5 months even, and it's been toxic, and you've said things that you shouldn't have said, and you've done things that maybe you shouldn't have done. And some people it gets rough, meet with a couple just the other day, and they were talking about this moment where it got so intense, and one of them pushed the other one. I'm like, guys, slow down, like pump the brakes, because anytime you're in a situation where things start to get physical or heated, you're saying toxic things, like belittling things, you're getting aggressive verbally. None of that helps, right? And all it does is make it difficult. And obviously the opposite is true too. You start turning in on yourself and you have this slow drift. Sometimes you just quit communicating. You're like, I don't really even care enough about you to get aggressive. Like, I'm done with this. So you don't want to wait that long. That's the key. You don't want to wait that long. So the question becomes like, how do you know? How do you know when you need to get real help? Like, how do you know when you need to get professional help? I would hope that people start before that. I hope you start working on your marriage before you ever need professional help. We look at it as kind of a funnel. At the top of the funnel, you have kind of everybody that needs to tune up their marriage. You don't drive your car without tuning it up, right? Do you drive your car for 8 years without changing the oil? No. You pay attention to it. You do the maintenance, the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly maintenance that you need for your car to make sure it runs well. But we just don't do that with our relationships. How crazy is that? You care more about your Chevy than you do about your significant other. It's wild. So you got the people at the top of the funnel that everybody needs, kind of that good, healthy marriage tune-up. And then as you go down the funnel, you really kind of have people that want to get into marital counseling or therapy, some intense work. So at Live Well, the cool part is that we do all of it, right? So we obviously do all the marriage counseling. We can do that in person, virtually. if you're in a situation, or if you listen to this talk today and you're like, man, maybe we do need to get some therapy, we can help, right? That's part of why we do what we do. It's part of why we're doing these videos, actually, is to give you resources and then point you to healthy resources that can help you kind of work one-on-one in a therapeutic environment. But the top of the funnel, remember, Live Well has that as well. Like your Live Well. A lot of you are watching this because you're part of our Live Well coaching platform, and coaching is for everybody. Like if you're married, you can benefit from Live Well coaching. We have a challenge coming out for Live Well coaching. As you're listening today and I start to get into this content, I really want to encourage you guys to think about doing this challenge. It's going to be coming out around the first week of February, and the challenge is going to be to a marital reset, right? Like, how do I reset my relationship? I shouldn't say marital, because we really want this to be for people that are in committed relationships, even if you're not married. What's the relationship reset skills? What does it look like? So that'll be about a 14-day challenge, and you and your significant other can do it together. That's what's cool. We'll actually have things you can do as a couple that you can lean into this. I really feel like if you did this for 14 days, I want to under promise and over deliver, right? But I'm pretty sure that kind of thing for 14 days is going to produce some positive, healthy change in your relationship. So if you want to do the relationship reset challenge on the Live Well coaching platform, I really encourage you to do that. Just go to livewell-coaching.com and you can register for that. Super easy. That registration will be up in the next few days. So just look for it. Be ready for it because it's coming. All right. So let's get into our content today. And one thing's funny is I as a psychologist, it's interesting to kind of live and work in the community that I live and work in, because it's just a really small community, and it's just kind of weird being a psychologist, honestly, because everywhere you go, you kind of see things and it's like, well, that's kind of an issue and that's sort of an issue. And we were at some friend's house. My wife and I were at some friend's house. This has been a while ago. And I guess they're pretty comfortable around us. This story will prove that they're really comfortable around us because they kind of got in a spat, right? So they start sort of yapping a little bit, and the little spat kind of turned like a little south on them, like right in front of Crystal and I. So it was weird. Like they're kind of going at it, and it was getting personal, and they're saying some things, and Crystal and I are looking at each other like, should we leave? Like what do you do in that situation? I wanted to do a session. I felt like saying, hey, sit down. We got this. Start the clock. My office will bill you, but didn't do that. So it all ended up fine. And I said something funny and they sort of like turned it off, and it was okay, but it was a pretty weird situation. And I was outside with the husband later on. He's like, man, I don't know. I'm sorry. He was kind of apologizing, like, sorry that, we went there. And I said, no problem, of course. And it wasn't, but he looked at me and he said, man, how do you know? Like, how do you know if that's normal or if that's not normal? Is what we did in there normal or not? Like, should we accept that or should we not? And I was like, well, dude, honestly, it's not super normal to do it in front of Crystal and I. Let's start there. But beyond that part, I think people have that question all the time. Like, how do I know when the stuff in my marriage has gotten to a point to where I need to kind of do something, whether I need to go to counseling or maybe do this relationship reset? What do we need to do to kind of get back on track? So that's sort of what I wanted to start with today in regard to marriage is how do you know when you do need to go to counseling? What are the signs that we can look for in our marriage that would say, okay, we want to do something different rather just continue to engage this process as toxic as it is over and over and over again. So, all right, number one, here's how you know you probably need to do something. You probably need to go see a therapist or a marriage counselor or a psychologist. You're having frequent and intense arguments. Frequent, increasing, or intense arguments can obviously do harm to a relationship. So that's an interesting kind of question. Like, what is frequent? Like, what is that? Like, what is intense? What does it mean to be intense? Like, if you're from a Eastern European family, like, you probably never argue. You're probably just like super stoic, right? Like, and so there's one cross word and you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. How could you say that? If you're from like an Italian family or a Hispanic family, and I mean, those families argue like crazy. Like, they get up and argue. And it's for sport and it feels great. I grew up in one of those families, by the way. I had 75 people at my Christmas family dinner, and man, it's not uncommon at all for people to just go at it. It was literally sport. You're just like eating and looking. It's like, oh, this is great. Are they going to hit each other, or are we just going to get hurt? It's like you never knew, and it was awesome. So, what is frequent? What is intense? I think it's a hard question to answer. I think you go with, does it feel unhealthy to you, right? And so that's sort of what only you can answer that. But does it feel unhealthy? Because if it feels toxic and unhealthy, then it's probably something that you need to look at. And then I would also look at like increasing amounts of arguing. If you've always argued and it's been at this intensity level, but now you're arguing all the time, that's probably something that you should say, let's look at this, guys. Let's maybe begin to say we should go see someone. I want to comment on just this one reality. You're going to fight. And I don't think you should go see a psychologist because you're fighting with your spouse, because spouses fight. If you're in a committed relationship, you're going to fight. You're two different people, two different experiences, two different histories. Man, you guys are coming from two different families of origin. You're going to have different understandings about, here's what we do in this situation, here's what we do in this situation. That's normal. As a matter of fact, if you're not fighting, that's probably an issue. Like, if you never have a crossword, it's probably an issue, because that means someone's not showing up. Correct? So you have to allow yourself to say, okay, there's moments where we fight, and let's normalize that. But what is that fight like? Is it characterized by aggression, like you do this, and labeling, and I'm going to get my point across at the expense of your dignity? Yeah, that's an issue, right? I think I don't care what kind of family you can come from my Italian family. Got it. If you're arguing with your significant other in a way that's like degrading, like you're this, and it's name calling and, cussing and dropping F-bombs, like that's not going to end well over time. You have to allow yourself to recognize there's moments where things get toxic, and we just have to have an understanding of what healthy looks like and be able to be honest with ourselves about if this argument or this continual argument that we're having seems unhealthy. Because if it's hedging in that territory, it's better to get help soon, right? Don't wait too late, right? Remember what we talk about all the time here at Live Well. Have we waited too late? Have we waited too long to get the help? Because that makes it a lot harder. Number 2, is there a lack of healthy communication? So just because you're not arguing doesn't mean you're communicating well. Sometimes communication is just shut down in a marriage and people aren't talking at all. And I'll tell you this much, if a couple comes into my counseling office and they sit on the couch and they start talking and they tell me they're not arguing at all, I start to worry about that, because I know we're in trouble. I know that marriage is in trouble. Like, if they're sitting on the couch and they're just not that impacted by the other person, like almost, you know what, I'm so done. You don't even have the power to get me angry. You don't even have the power to pull me into an argument. To me, that's worse. That means they've gone so far down the road that they're never going to be able to attach emotionally, or at least it's going to be much more difficult to attach emotionally. So if you can't argue, or you don't have a care enough about your significant spouse or other to even argue anymore, or if you just don't know how to handle conflict, if you're so scared of it and kind of withdraw from it that you never go there, that's not healthy communication. And you might not be arguing, but you're definitely not communicating. Go quickly to the therapist office, right? Like call today, because that usually doesn't end well. I'll make a statement that for me is true anecdotally. I don't know what's true in the research, but I know for me anecdotally, this is true. Couples that come in and they have no communication. They're just cut off from one another. They don't talk. They don't even care enough to talk, that you can't impact me like that. Those couples actually don't do near as well in therapy, and more of those couples end up divorced. So just know that. That's how high the stakes are when it comes to healthy communication. All right, number 3. How do we know if we need to go get some help? One or both of you is withdrawing emotion. If you avoid healthy communication long enough, one member of that dyad is going to withdraw. And withdrawal can create distance. It can create disconnect. And when someone feels like their spouse or their significant other has abandoned them emotionally, like they're just not in this anymore, that's a massive problem. And if you're watching this or listening to this and you're in a relationship like that, where you feel like, well, I just don't even feel like they're here with me. I don't even feel like they're in this marriage. And they're so withdrawn. I don't know what's going on inside their head. I can't call how they feel or how they're even thinking. It's been so long since we felt connected emotionally. You've got to get help. Don't wait. Don't wait too long. Now's the time. Like if you're having this conversation in your head, you've got to get that out to your spouse, because that emotional withdrawal is a major warning sign for future problems and a great predictor of divorce if you're married. All right, number 4. Trust has become a problem. There are massive trust issues. If you have massive trust issues in a marriage, do not let that go unchecked. You have to address those issues, because trust is the foundation of any good, healthy relationship, right? So if you look at the reality of what's going on in a relationship, trust is really the crucial factor in a relationship that, if it's broken, can bring about insecurity. It brings about doubt. It brings about stress. And so you can't just let that sit, because it festers, right? It's like if you have an infection in your body and you don't go get antibiotics. Will that resolve on its own? I mean, maybe, but if the infection is bad enough, it's just going to grow. And you go from, I have this wound on my arm, to I have a systemic infection that's all over in my blood, and you can die from that. You can go septic, right? It's the same way with trust in a relationship. If you don't address it, it's likely to start to take up the space in your marriage, in your relationship, and it will fester. It will fester, and it will ultimately be global, systemic, and it can take your marriage from you. I'm telling you right now, if you have a trust issue with your spouse and you don't fully trust them and it's unresolved and you're not working on it, you've got to get help. Like, now's the time to go get marital counseling. Now's the time to say, okay, let's do this relational reset. At least start with that on the Live Well coaching platform, because if you don't start to do something to address the lack of trust in your relationship, the outcome could be pretty difficult. Trust can stem, or a lack of trust can stem, from personal experiences. Like, these are things that we've been through in the past, or it can be current behaviors in a relationship. So know that. And for those of you that have been the betrayer, like you've been the one that's broken the trust, a lot of times for you, you're like, hey, that's the past, man. That was like a year ago. Or are you going to bring that affair up? Like, how many times are you going to bring that affair up? I mean, seriously, I can't live like this the rest of my... That was 6 months ago, or that was 3 weeks ago. I told you I'm done with her or him. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's where you're at. And I'm not judging you, by the way, because I know it's probably where your heart is at. If you're saying that and verbalizing that and you have good intentions, it's probably where your heart is at. You're like, I'm not there anymore. I don't want that anymore. But what you have to recognize is that trust, that betrayal, even though it's not happening right here, right now, it's still this wound from the past. And if it's unhealed and unresolved, it can fester. So don't get mad that your spouse is like continuing to bring it up. Allow yourself to say, okay, it is what it is. He's still hurting. She's still hurting. Let's address it. Let's look at it. All right. Number 5. There's just so much I can say about this, guys. I think we could be talking about probably just trust issues, honestly, for an hour, because there's so many things that can cause it. It is things like affairs and sexual betrayal, but it's way more than that, right? I mean, do you trust your spouse in how they handle money? Do you trust your spouse in how they handle time? Do you trust your spouse in how they handle technology? Do you trust that they're not going to, get on the internet and look at pornography, or get on the internet and just obsess over, doom scrolling on social media and ignore the family? Trust can be a multitude of things. And so you've got to allow yourselves to just really lean into that and not judge each other as you begin to pursue health. You have to resolve trust issues. You have to grieve betrayals in order to ever go forward. You want to get it off the table, you have to process it, you have to grieve it, and you have to get on the other side of it. All right, enough said. Like I said, that's an hour we could spend there, but we won't. Number 5, how do we know if you need to kind of lean into some sort of marriage therapy or do something for your marriage? There's a lack of sexual intimacy in your marriage or in your relationship. Intimacy is an integral part of a healthy marriage. Like, we have to start with that assumptions. And if for those of you that are watching that are people of faith, like, that's like a big piece of the puzzle, right? When you come to marriage, is like sexuality is part of what makes it a unique relationship, right? If you don't have some of those like emotionally intimate moments and those sexually intimate moments, what is the relationship really? I mean, is it really a marriage? If that's not there, is it really a marriage? Or is it just a roommate or a business partner or a really great friend? And not that any of those things are bad. I'm not saying you don't need to pursue friendship in your marriage. I'm saying the opposite, actually. But my point is, man, sex is a piece of the puzzle. That's part of what it brings to the table. When marriage brings to the table for a relationship is we're adding this piece of our relationship that only exists where? In this relationship. So some people kind of just struggle sometimes with sexual desire just in general in marriage. It's not unusual at all, right? And there's different seasons that people go through where they feel like, man, I'm just not there. And I think in some ways that's normal, right? So you do have to allow for the ebb and flow of like normal, healthy sexuality in a marriage. So like name a season of life that, sex might start to kind of go down, like the sex drive or the libido. You have your first kid. You're staying up all night. You're exhausted. I mean, yeah, maybe that's a moment where you're not going to be as interested sexually. you're super stressed out because you got a new job and you're working 80 hours a week and you're burnt out. You don't have energy. And the last thing you want to do is think about sex when you come home from work. Okay, got it. There's moments where it waxes and wanes, and I get that, and that's normal. Menopause, like for women, I think just looking at sort of what hormonal fluctuations do and kind of normalizing the fact that, okay, I'm at a point where the libido's low. Got it. Aging. I think aging just in general, sex changes. And if you don't understand how or why it's changing, then there's a tendency for people to just lose interest. So I'm bringing all this up to normalize the idea that, dude, absolutely in your marriage, there's moments where you might feel just the sexual disconnect. Totally normal. What I'm saying is don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. And some of you, that's exactly what you want to do. The idea of working on it, thinking about it, talking about it feels really uncomfortable, right? So you kind of just avoid it. And then, if we're honest, you probably get mad when your spouse brings it up. So if you're not on the same page and your sexual rhythm is off and one person wants more sex than the other person wants, and you're on the low end, you're like, my libido is way down here, you probably resent that your spouse is pressuring you and pushing and talking. Why is that all you talk? That's all you care about. I wish you'd look. Wishing that something isn't the way it is does nothing to change the way it is. So your spouse, if they're coming and they're wanting to talk about, like, what do we do about this? Like, what's our plan? Like, man, I really want to encourage you to be open about it and allow yourself to go back to what we were saying earlier. This is part of what it means to be married. So look, no one should judge you. No one should criticize you. No one should dominate you. Got it. But by the same token, man, you should be willing to respond to good, healthy conversations about what are we doing with our sexuality. And I'm telling you, if there's a lack of sexual intimacy that's been going on for, weeks, months, years, you should address that. Don't just let it sit there. Don't just let it fester. All right, again, we could do another, 7 hours about that conversation, but I think it's important to just allow yourself to say, okay, there are moments where I need to let myself be honest with me and with my spouse, with my significant other. And in that honesty, we need to let ourselves pursue healthy whenever possible. And if you have one of those things going on in your marriage, just pick any one of them. Like if you're not having a healthy sexuality, if you're not communicating well, if you're having moments where your arguing is getting more intense, you just can't ignore it. The more you push and suppress that emotion, the worse it's going to get. And you don't want to be one of those couples that the therapist at LiveWell sit in our team meetings and say, man, I hope they haven't waited too long. Don't wait. If one of those things is going on in your marriage, now's the time. Now's the time to get help. And I want to give you some hope here. If you address these issues, you absolutely can make progress. I think the data is, I'm going to check the stat. I think it's 70% of people. Yeah, that's a big number. 70% of couples that sought therapy for their marriage reported that the therapy worked. That's nutso, right? That's a pretty high number. Many of you that are watching this right now and you feel like, it's just lost and you'll never reclaim what the marriage was, and that you could never get back to kind of this sense of connection and a healthy way of being with your spouse. What if I told you, if you take some risks and you allow yourself to get help, 70% of you, after one course of marital therapy, are going to feel a lot better? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you go through the pain or the anxiety or the struggle in scheduling or even the financial commitment to get therapy if you knew it could get better? And I guess that's where we end today, is use this talk to give yourself some real hope that things can get better. There's a lot of you that are watching and you're like, man, I just don't know. Or maybe you'll say, we've tried marital therapy. It didn't work. We're still struggling. Got it. But if you knew that taking that step and calling up a marriage counseling office and making an appointment, if you knew that there was a strong possibility that things would get better, wouldn't you do it? Wouldn't you do it? What's your other option? Your other option is you just live in misery. And a wise man that used to teach here in Brevard County said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If nothing changes, nothing changes. You're in a tough marriage. Your relationship is struggling. All the things that we talk about are going on today, right? All the things. You're like, yep, Mike, number 1, check. Number 2, check. Number 3, check. If nothing changes, nothing changes. If you don't do something differently, in all likelihood, you're going to be sitting in the same space a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 20 years from now. And man, I don't want you to be that person. I don't want you to be that person that sits in my office and says, yeah, we haven't had sex in 10 years. What? Why? Like, why not allow yourself to say, okay, I'm going to lean into this. I'm going to do everything I can. Is there a guarantee? No, there's no guarantee. Don't ever meet with any therapist or marriage counselor. Don't do any challenge on our website if there's a guarantee that says, I promise you, if you do this, your marriage is going to get better, because we don't know that. But I know one thing. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Do something. Do something. And my hope is, as you engage a risk and you say, okay, let's do something different, that you're going to start to see progress, and you're going to start to see yourself living in that relationship that you always knew you could have. All right. I'm going to encourage you guys again. If this talk prompted something and you want to meet with somebody at our offices or virtually for relationship counseling, we want to do that for you. So just don't hesitate to reach out to us. The website is livewellbehavioralhealth.com. You can contact us. I promise you we'll get back to you quick, and we'll get you in quick. If you want to do the relationship reset, which might be a good start, right? Maybe it's just a good start, something we can do differently. Go to livewell-coaching.com and you can register for that challenge. It'll be 14 days and it's free. Like, why wouldn't you? If you're not going to go to therapy, why wouldn't you at least try this challenge? Do something today to make your marriage everything that you know it can be and that it should be. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Really enjoy these Wellness Wednesdays.